Well, thank you all for coming. Obviously, it's really exciting to see so many people here, a lot of people that I know, and a lot of friendly faces, and a lot of new people as well, and that's just terrific. It's a growing center. It really is, and we've made so many aggressive new moves over the last year that I'm sure you'll hear about all throughout the weekend. But I want to start off the weekend by talking a little bit about what it is that we are fighting for and what it is that we're fighting against. First of all, hey, Em. We deserve the truth as Americans. Now, I know that that's a controversial statement for this particular administration, that we deserve the truth. The founder of Obamacare, the creator of Obamacare, said just this week that Obamacare was written in a tortured way to make sure that the Congressional Budget Office did not score the Obamacare mandate as taxes. If the CBO had scored the mandate as taxes, the bill dies. So it's written to do that. He says, lack of transparency is a huge political advantage, and basically call it the stupidity of the American voter or whatever, but basically that was really, really critical for the thing to pass. Right? They had to lie to us in order to pass Obamacare. Now, this particular statement, which is, by the way, exactly what conservatives have now been saying for nigh on 6 years, that they had to lie in order to pass this monstrosity. This statement, which was repeated no less than 3 times by Jonathan Gruber in 3 different contexts, it made the network news precisely 0 times. It was not on ABC, it was not on CBS, it was not on NBC. It was on 0 of them. Now, at the same time that these comments were coming out, there was also a picture of Kim Kardashian's ass that graced the cover of Paper magazine. It was supposed to hashtag break the internet. It was really, she'd fully unclothed and oiled herself up, and they photoshopped her butt so that it was larger than usual, which is saying a lot. And she, and so they had this picture of her from behind to break the internet. This was actually covered by the network news, which led me to suggest that perhaps the solution to all of this would be if we could somehow convince Kim Kardashian to tattoo Jonathan Gruber's comments on her ass, then it would be covered. We deserve the truth. We're not getting the truth. Ferguson has been the great lie, the second big racial lie of the last 2 years after the George Zimmerman Trayvon Martin case, St. Trayvon of the Blessed Hoodie, and St. Michael of the Gentle Giantedness. The Ferguson situation has been twisted and perverted beyond all semblance of reality. There was a very, very long piece in the Washington Post. Just yesterday, it was about a 2,000-word piece in the Washington Post talking about the glories of all of the protesters in Ferguson, one of whom had quit her job, her lucrative job as a subway worker, to protest full-time and live on other people's couches. And this 2,000-word diatribe about how wonderful these protests were, it carried precisely 0 content, none, about what actually went down in Ferguson, which is that there was a 6'5", 290-pound black man who strong-arm robbed a convenience store, then proceeded to get pulled over by a cop, then proceeded to jump through the window of the cop car, went for the cop's gun, got shot in the hand, ran away from the cop, turned around and charged the cop, and was shot to death. None of that made it into the story. By the way, that story is backed by 6 different black witnesses and all the physical evidence. That didn't make it into the Washington Post. All we got from the Washington Post is that the protesters were some of the most wonderful people ever to grace the earth, and we should pay them enormous amounts of money not to work at Subway. We saw this summer with regard to Israel during the Gaza war. We saw the lies that were being told that Israel was somehow targeting civilians, that it was a genocide, if so, the least successful genocide in human history. We were told that there was some sort of moral equivalence between the people who were attempting to send in their own troops to get killed in order to save civilians and the people who were putting their troops behind civilians in order so that civilians would be murdered. That moral equivalence was not only blasted by the media, it was backed by our administration. We're lied to. We're lied to not just by our politicians, we're lied to every single day, not just about political issues, but about the nature of humanity and about the nature of power. Now, our founders knew that all of this would happen. They were smart men. They understood that all of this would happen. They saw the possibility that our politicians and our media would lie to us. They fought against us. They fought against this. They designed a system specifically so that there were checks and balances to prevent these lies from taking precedence. And that's why the left hates the system. That's why the left has to tear down the constitutional system, because it is built on certain fundamental premises about what human beings are, about what we are capable of doing. And the left doesn't believe any of those premises. And so the system must be torn down. And that is what the left in America is all about. There are three basic and fundamental principles that undergird the U.S. Constitution, our entire system of Americanism. The first one is that the nature of mankind is neither good nor bad. We are capable of great evil, and we are capable of great good. And the founders said this openly. In the Federalist Papers in Federalist 51, Madison writes specifically about this. He talks about if men were angels, you wouldn't need a government. If men were devils, then government would not be any help to us. Men have the option of being either or, but that's why you need checks and balances. The second fundamental principle of Americanism is that we all have natural rights. We're made in the image of God, and that all of our natural rights spring from a divine source. You want to call it nature, you want to call it God, it doesn't really matter. The bottom line is that we have inalienable rights that are given to us by someone higher than us. And these rights cannot be alienated. The Constitution gives us individual freedom because, obviously, if we're made in the image of God, we don't have the right to take away anybody else's rights. And those rights are not limited to your mind. When the left talks about freedom of speech or freedom of religion, they seem to be under the impression that freedom of religion means I get to go to church maybe on Sundays or synagogue maybe on Saturdays, and I get to pray every so often, and then I'm supposed to forget religion as soon as I walk out the doors of the church. Religion just stops. I walk out, religion is over, the rest of my life continues. That's a lie. The founders knew that was a lie. They believe that our rights are only worthwhile if they are operative. Our rights are only worthwhile if we can live out those rights in everyday life. It's not just a right to thought, as you keep hearing. There is no right to thought in the Constitution. That was assumed. There's a right to speech. There's a right to bear arms. There's a right to freedom of religion. There's a right to do things. And the left doesn't agree with that. And the third fundamental principle that underlies our system of government, that underlies the U.S. Constitution, is that the minute, the very second, the instant that the government invades these rights, it loses all legitimacy. All legitimacy. Not partial legitimacy. When these rights are invaded by the government is no longer legitimate. And as they wrote in the Declaration, you now have a duty to remove that government and replace it. Now, the left disagrees with all three of these basic principles. They disagree, first of all, that the nature of mankind is split. They don't believe that. They believe that all men are good unless they're rich, in which case they are universally evil. The Marxists decided that polarizing us along class lines wasn't enough, so they also decided to polarize us along racial lines. So if you're white, you're also evil. They decided to polarize us along sex lines, so that means that if you're male, you're also evil. They would pit the powerful against the powerless, and only virtuous people, the only virtuous people on earth were the powerless. In fact, your non-success in life was evidence of your virtue. The less successful you are, the better the person you are, according to the left. Which is why there's a constant surge of revolution from the bottom. It's why they fight against our perception. That's why they don't like checks and balances, because checks and balances suggest that people who are on the bottom rung of society, the have-nots in the Alinskyite view, that the have-nots must be checked, that these people are capable of great evil, which of course they are. The left disagrees with that. On a fundamental level, they believe that if you succeed in American life, then you are proof positive that you have overstepped the boundaries of equality. Because after all, if we were all equal, we would all end up the same. That means that if you do not end up equal with somebody else, that's because you must have cheated somewhere. Second, the left does not believe in natural rights springing from God. All rights come directly from the government. These folks are, to put it more deeply, legal positivists. They believe that rights are established by the government. There is no fundamental basis for your rights. When you claim rights in the name of God, it's because you're audacious, or it's because you're a fool, because there's no such thing as God. They believe that religious people are duped into inaction by promises of a higher power or an afterlife, and so the only way for you to be guaranteed rights is for the government to come in and guarantee you those rights yourself, because you're not made in the image of God. There is no God. And that's, of course, what makes the left so willing to break heads and create omelets out of eggs. Because after all, if we're not made in the image of God, and if there are no natural rights from God, and if those rights are alienable, and if we can invade each other's rights, then what the hell, why not? For the greater good, we can always do that. The Constitution, of course, assumes that such a view is absolutely tyrannical, which it is. I mean, there's a massive difference between countries that believe in a natural rights view of humanity and countries that do not. You know, my great-grandfather on my father's side came to the United States in 1921. He came from Russia, and he proceeded to learn English and get a job and work in the United States. They were religious when they came. They became non-religious. My family became religious again, and that's why I'm standing here, because this is America where we have natural rights from God. The rest of his family did not leave Europe. They stayed, and they moved to Warsaw, and they lived there under a government that did not believe that natural rights come from God. They don't have any descendants because they're ash. That is the difference between governments that believe in a natural rights view and those who do not believe in a natural rights view. The left does not believe in a natural rights view, which is why the left tends toward massive tyranny and genocide. Collectivism kills. And make no mistake, when you look at folks who want to alienate the rights that you are given by God, when you look at people who say that you don't have rights from nature or from God, no higher power has given you those rights, they are fascists. These are tyrants, because every law that they pass to invade your rights is backed by a gun. Now, David is fond of saying that inside every totalitarian, inside every leftist lurks a totalitarian screaming to get out. And that's exactly right, except I'm not sure it's lurking anymore. Now it's just right there on the face. All of the folks who proclaim that they hate guns only hate guns when you have them. They love guns. They adore guns when the government has them and they're pointing it at you to force you to do something. The third element of American government that the left despises is the idea that the government can lose legitimacy. The government does not believe it can lose legitimacy. The left never believes the government can lose legitimacy because, after all, the government is us. Right? The government is just a reflection of who we are. And this is not me assuming. This is exactly what President Obama has said. He said this openly. He was saying about gun rights, for example. President Obama said this. He said that anybody who worries about the seizure of firearms in the United States is playing into fears about government. No duh. He says, you hear some of these folks, I need a gun to protect myself from the government. We can't do background checks because the government's going to come take away my guns. The government's us. These officials are elected by you. I am constrained as they are constrained by the system our founders put in place. Here's the problem. Number one, he's not constrained. Number two, if the government is us, and if we really have nothing to fear, then we have no rights. We might as well just elect a tyrant, and the tyrant will rule over us in, we hope, benevolent fashion. But our rights are completely alienable because, after all, we can alienate our own rights. The government is just us. And this is why the left is fighting an all-out war on the Constitution, and we are seeing it every day in this country. President Obama with his executive amnesty, President Obama with his lawless treaties on climate change, President Obama with his executive orders on everything from military matters to drone strikes. The President of the United States is a lawless man. He is a lawless man representing a lawless philosophy and representing a massive group of people in America who are lawless and vote for lawless people, which, of course, is the biggest problem. Obama's not doing this on his own. There are a lot of people who had to vote for him to make this happen. He didn't build that. Now, the hatred for the U.S. Constitution is not something that I'm assuming, and it's not a slur, it's a fact. The left despises every aspect of the Constitution. They despise the rights that are enumerated in the Bill of Rights. They most assuredly hate the structural Constitution, the actual part of the Constitution that matters, the parts with the checks and balances, the boring part that nobody reads. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who we can only hope will retire sometime in the near future when a Republican is president, Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, she was asked about the creation of a constitution in Iraq. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg said this, quote, I would not look to the U.S. Constitution. If I were drafting a constitution in the year 2012, I might look at the Constitution of South Africa. She said that was a deliberate attempt to have a fundamental instrument of government that embraced basic human rights, had an independent judiciary. It really is, I think, a great piece of work that was done, much more recent than the U.S. Constitution. Well, what's so great about the South African Constitution? Well, I'll tell you what's so great about the South African Constitution. Section 26 of the South African Constitution contains the following provision. The right to housing, including the right to due process with regard to court-ordered eviction and demolition. So the government has to provide you a home, and then if you're living in a home that you rent from somebody and you decide not to pay the rent, then they can't just evict you. There's a long process to get rid of you. It's like California. Section 27 of the South African Constitution says that everybody in the country has the rights to food, water, health care, and social assistance, which the state must progressively realize within the limits of its resources. Now, there's only one problem with all of this, of course, which is that half the population of South Africa has no housing, has no food, has no water, has no health care, and has no social assistance. It turns out that just promising people crap doesn't make crap magically appear. But the left has completely shifted the definition of rights from rights that are given to you by God or rights that are given to you by nature to rights that are given to you by government. And if government can give you the right to free speech, well, surely they can give you the right to a house. And by the right to a house, it means the right to demand that the construction worker build you a house. Or by a right to health care, surely it means that they can demand that government has the right to force my wife, who's going to be a doctor, to give you health care of your choice up to and including abortion in the state of California, even if she objects to abortion. Because after all, you have rights, and your rights trump everybody else's rights, because in the end, collectivism, leftism they portray themselves as the kindest, gentlest, most noble of all humans. Collectivists and leftists are the most selfish people on the planet. The most selfish people that have ever been created on God's green earth. They're absolutely selfish. That's because collectivists, for lack of a better analogy, are like my baby. They cry and they expect me to take care of them. The good news is that at one point my 9-month-old baby will grow out of it, whereas leftists never do. But collectivists believe that because they are breathing, we owe you stuff. Right? You're breathing, therefore you are owed. Capitalism is the most altruistic form of any system. That's because the rule under capitalism is, I don't get to breathe unless I give you stuff that you want. Right? If I don't trade you goods or services that you want, I'm going to die of starvation. Capitalism is, in fact, forced altruism. Collectivism is just force. And all these constitutions that the left loves so deeply in rejecting the fundamental tenets of the U.S. Constitution, these have historical precedent, long historical precedent. For example, there's a famous constitution that talked about how the distribution and usage of real estate would be supervised by the state in order to prevent abuse, in order to strive to secure healthy housing to all families, especially those with many children, in order to maintain health and the ability to work, in order to protect motherhood, and to prevent economic consequences of age, weakness, protect against the vicissitudes of life. The state establishes a comprehensive system of insurances based on the critical contribution of the insured. The state may transfer economic enterprises suited for nationalization into common property. Of course, I'm talking about the Weimar Constitution, which was the basis under which Hitler came to power. And when Hitler came to power, see, it wasn't that the Weimar Constitution was just written out. It wasn't. Historically speaking, the Weimar Constitution continued to operate all through the Nazi era. In fact, Hitler's justification for taking full power was to guarantee the rights that were guaranteed in the Weimar Constitution. And he said this openly. In 1933, when he pushed forward the Enabling Act, he said, quote, "The government will make use of these powers only insofar as they are essential for carrying out vitally necessary measures. The existence of neither the Reichstag nor the Reichsrat is endangered. The position and the rights of the Reich President remain inviolate. It will always be the first and foremost task of the government to bring about inner consensus with his aims. The rights of churches will not be curtailed. Their position vis-a-vis the state will not be altered." He said the number of cases where there's any necessity for using the law at all is in and of itself limited. In other words, he didn't come in with an army full of jackbooted thugs and simply take over the country. He said it would be gradual. He said he just needed a little bit of temporary power. If we could just lend it to him, that if the Reichstag and the Reichsrat would not work with him, then he might have to do it himself. Because after all, the people had called on him to do something. And it had to be done, no matter what the consequences. Because after all, the people had rights, rights guaranteed by the government. And if the government did not make those rights happen, then the rights would disappear. Well, we sort of pick up on what happened there. So the question becomes, what do we do about all of this? And this is really the big question, because we are facing a challenge unlike any that we've ever faced in American history. I really believe that we are living on the knife's edge, because for all of the dangers that Islamofascism poses, and we'll talk about all of that this weekend, and all the dangers that are posed by the environmental left, and we'll talk about that this weekend as well, the real danger that we have in the United States is an American public willing to sign away its God-given rights for the promises of security from a government. We have a body politic that is sick to its core, that is cancer-ridden. We have a group of people who have been voting into office on a routine basis, people who would violate their rights regularly, all in their own name. And so the question becomes, what do we do about that? How do we conquer that? Because once the immune system is gone, then all the rest of these problems will just take us out. Islamofascism can never defeat the United States unless the United States first defeats the United States. And right now we're watching as the United States is busily defeating the United States. So what do we have to do? Well, to get back to the original theme, we have to continue speaking the truth, which sounds a little bit vague, but is the truth. We have to fight collectivists at every turn by speaking in terms that people understand, by speaking using words that they get. The right is constantly speaking in terms of efficacy, efficiency. Our policies work, their policies don't. Who gives a flying crap? Really, it turns out that efficacy and efficiency have nothing to do with winning elections. If they did, Barack Obama never would have been president, and he certainly never would have been reelected. FDR wouldn't have been elected 4 times if efficacy and efficiency actually mattered. What matters is the moral battle. This is what David Horowitz understands better than anybody on planet Earth. What matters here is the understanding that collectivism is evil. Not just its effects, not just its impacts. The philosophy itself is a violation of all that is good in humanity. It violates, in fact, every single one of the 10 commandments, all of them. Especially commandment number 10, not to covet your neighbor's ass, written specifically for Bill Clinton. So on a practical level, how do we fight the collectivists? Well, the collectivists can really be broken down into three separate categories. There's the government leftists, there's the media leftists, and there's the educational system. And we here at the Freedom Center are interested in taking down each one of these things. Now, the big mistake that conservatives make is that we start with the government. The government comes last. We always dump billions of dollars into elections. We spend tons of money on bad Karl Rove ads that people TiVo through, in the mistaken impression that people don't know what TiVo is. You know, it's this cool machine where you go right through commercials, folks. And we spent $400 million with Karl Rove on TiVo to ads. The government is a manifestation of the apathy of the people. People do not pay attention. The average time that somebody spends online, I'm talking about people who are aware, the average time that people spend online reading any given article, any article that you click on, the average amount of time is 1 minute and 28 seconds. The average amount of time, the average book that is sold in America, the average book is read by less than 10% of the people who actually buy the book. Hillary Clinton's book, Living History, they've done studies on this, and they found that Hillary Clinton's Living History was the single least read mass bestseller of all time. I believe that if I get this statistic correctly, only 7% of the people who bought Hillary Clinton's book read beyond page 9. Which is, you know, Hillary... I could make a Lewinsky joke here, but I won't. The problem is that because of the people being conditioned by the media and by educational systems, they vote for people who make them feel good about themselves. All of politics in America has become feel good. It's all about feeling good about yourself, which is why I have suggested that we actually do create a constitutional amendment, just one, to create the position of figurehead. And that figurehead will be much like the Israeli president or like the British crown. It won't actually do anything. It'll just sit there and we'll elect it every so often, and it'll represent the great diversity of America. And then we can all feel really good about ourselves and it won't have to govern. So we'll elect like a black lesbian little person, and then we can all feel terrific about ourselves and move on with our lives and actually elect somebody competent to run the government. But in order to defeat the governmental hegemony that's been created here, and we really do at this point live in an elected tyranny. Every 4 years we get to change the tyrant, but the bureaucratic state is an elected tyranny. And while we can get very excited about the Senate, and we can get very excited about conservatives seeming to upswing during midterm elections, we're going to have to recognize the truth, which is this is not just a matter of freezing the president's agenda. This is a matter of rolling back 100 years of horrible legislation and regulatory burdens that are crippling America and have been for generations. In order to do that, we need to take out the single greatest purveyor of lies in America, and that is the mainstream media. The mainstream... The mainstream media is a factory of lies from Jon Stewart and his purported comic genius. By the way, if you ever want to see how much of a genius Jon Stewart is, take away his live audience. Really, see what he does when he makes a funny face and there isn't anybody in the audience to laugh. You'll see there's not much there. From Jon Stewart to George Stephanopoulos, the most objective reporter in America, who actually officiated a debate in New Hampshire in which he had campaigned with one of the candidates in the debate. The news media is the greatest purveyor of lies. I mentioned it up top, all of the lies that the news media tell and tell on a regular basis. We were just engaged with the news media in one of these lies last week. This one was a particularly fun one. How many people in the room know who Lena Dunham is? Okay, so basically everybody under the age of 50 knows who Lena Dunham is, and nobody over the age of 50 knows who Lena Dunham is. A few people over the age of 50 do, but that's because your kids told you. And by the way, you're leading more enriching lives because you don't know who Lena Dunham is, so you don't have to feel bad about that. For those who don't know, Lena Dunham is the star of a show called HBO's Girls. She writes it, she stars in it, and she is the most famous leftist spokesperson in America under the age of 40. She cut a commercial for President Obama during the 2012 election cycle in which she compared voting for President Obama the first time to losing her virginity. The difference was she couldn't vote until she was 18. But Lena Dunham also had cut a campaign commercial. In this particular election cycle, she had cut a campaign commercial for Planned Parenthood. She cut one for Rock the Vote. She's most famous mostly because she's unattractive and gets naked on a regular basis on television. And the reason that she's famous for that is because if she were attractive and got naked on television, we'd all sort of get it. But everybody is sort of puzzled, and after reaching for the eye bleach, decides that she must be a feminist warrior because she's an ugly woman taking off all her clothes. And the entire left has decided that this is the case. The entire left has decided that her rolls of fat make her a feminist icon. And so she has been put at the forefront of feminist leftism. Well, it turns out that she had a memoir come out in the last couple of weeks called Not That Kind of Girl, which begs the question as to who would be that kind of girl. And in this book, Not That Kind of Girl, she discusses her various sexual escapades. And in particular, there is a section of her book in which she discusses various sexual escapades with her 6 years younger sister. She talks about sexually abusing her sister when she was 7 and her sister was 1, looking at her genitalia with her parents approving. Her parents are, by the way, extraordinarily screwed up. Her dad paints these really ridiculous kind of postmodern pictures of vaginas, and her mom took pictures. They are perverts, actually. And her mom would take pictures of her genitalia, put them on the walls. I mean, really, if these people were, and she's a trust fund baby, if these people were not extraordinarily wealthy, this kid would have been taken away at age 3. There's no question about it. And Lena Dunham writes about molesting her, basically abusing her sister when her sister was 1, and then abusing her sister again when she was approximately 11, her sister was 5, paying her sister in the manner of a sexual predator, direct quote from her book, in the manner of a sexual predator, paying her 6 years younger sister to kiss her on the mouth for 5 seconds or longer, and then when she was 17 and her sister was 11, sleeping in the same bed next to her, quote, sweaty, muscly body, and pleasuring herself in bed next to her sister. Now, this book had received, which is a bestseller. It's on the New York Times bestseller list. It's going to be the #1 bestseller in America. This book was reviewed by every major publication in America and Europe. 0 of them found this troubling. 0 of them. The reviews ranged from she's cute and quirky and funny and charming to she overshares. Well, which is sure a hell of an excuse for it. Well, Kevin Williamson over at National Review wrote a definitive takedown of Lena Dunham, went through the entire book. And buried in paragraph 10 or 11 of this takedown, which is the part of the article that nobody reads, I mentioned before, 1 minute, 28 seconds. Buried in paragraph 9 of this long article were these revelations about what she'd written about her sister. So we at Truth Revolt did what we always do, which is we cribbed, and we went to paragraph 9, and we took it out, and then we put a headline up, Lena Dunham sexually abused her little sister. Right, now this was a completely different thing because people will actually read the headline. Lena Dunham proceeded to tweet out that she was massively offended by us. She then proceeded to send the Freedom Center a legal threat to sue us for defamation for posting the story. And in typical right-wing fashion, half the right ran from us, because this is what the right does when confronted with any sort of battle at all from the left. Half the right suggested that we apologize, and half the right kind of stayed silent. And finally, we released a piece that was linked up at Drudge that was titled, an editorial that said, Lena Dunham threatens to sue Truth Revolt for quoting her book. Sure enough, the threat sort of vanished into the ether. And this story, by the way, was the #1 story. You think culture doesn't matter, folks? Culture matters so much more than politics, it is not even close. This story was the #1 story the day before a national election on Google, on Twitter, and on Facebook. All 3 of them had it ranked #1 in the world. The story of Lena Dunham. She hasn't been on Twitter since. She canceled the rest of her European book tour. And now even Time magazine feels the necessity to condemn child abuse, which is great. I'm glad they finally came around to that position a few decades after Roman Polanski. So the media has tremendous control over what we see in here unless we break through it. And one of the ways we break through it is by telling the truth. And another way that we break through the media wall is by going after their advertisers. And this is really where some folks on the right get nervous. Because, you know, we're nice people, and we ideologically have a problem with the idea of going after advertisers for the activities of the people for whom they advertise, because after all, that's a tactic of the left. I personally have moral objections to this. I also have moral objections to using a nuclear weapon or threatening the use of a nuclear weapon, but I have more moral objections to getting nuked. So we sort of have a choice here, which is we can either use tactics that work and win, or we can not use those tactics and get our asses kicked. So what we've been doing is we've been spending the last year going after advertisers on the left. This is why Martin Bashir and Alec Baldwin are no longer on the air. We have to leverage their own tactics against them. They use this against Rush. They've tried to use this against Glenn Beck. They've been unsuccessful because Rush and Glenn are too popular. But the tactics of the left are extraordinarily successful. You have to cut off their money, and you have to show them and paint them for the liars they are on a consistent and repeat basis, and never stop doing it. The third part of the triumvirate that we have to defeat, government of course comes last after we change the culture by destroying the media and then replacing the media, by the way, creating our own content to replace all of that, which is a big task in and of itself. It's why we focus on actually reaching young people. It's why we have videos that every single week reach over 100,000 people. They each have 100,000 hits. We get more views on an average video at Truth Revolt than headline news gets in an average hour. We have to build that superstructure up in order to replace the media that we are destroying. The educational system is the third part of this triumvirate. And the educational system we all know is a disaster. We always focus on colleges. And you'll see around you this weekend, and I hope you take a chance to talk to them, you're going to see a group of students who we call the TRX students. They're our Truth Revolt students. And they are warriors, folks. These are kids who are willing to do stuff that nobody else is willing to do. They will take fire from their own side to do it. They are gutsy, and they are brilliant. And we spend time training them not in philosophy. We figure that they're already conservative by the time they get to us. We train them in tactics. We bring in James O'Keefe to talk to them about how to do undercover video. We bring in Jason Matera to talk to them how to do confrontational interviews. We bring in Elisha Krauss to talk about grassroots organizing. We train them up, and then we set them loose. And they make a hell of a lot of trouble. We have a student right now who is being pursued by the administration of one particular college, and this will be a very big news story in the next couple of weeks, so watch out for it. And yes, the mainstream media will cover it. One of our favorite things that we're going to do next is we're going to set all of these folks loose with cameras and tape recorders into their classrooms. And if Ward Churchill suggested that the people who died on 9/11 were 3,000 little Eichmanns, our goal is to create 3,000 little Ward Churchills. Want to destroy careers and make them miserable at every turn. And we want to extend that downward into the public school system. And the only way to do that is to provide alternative content. Content that kids watch, content that kids actually understand. It's why we're creating graphic novels of American history for kids who are in 3rd and 4th and 5th grade because they don't consume stuff any other way. It's why we focus on video as opposed to written content. It's why we try to keep everything short and clipped and to the point, because kids have the attention span of a gnat thanks to Sesame Street. The educational system can be fixed, but only if we first tear down the bulwark that they have built up. Because the truth is that by the time they hit college, most of them are already gone. You spend 40 hours a week in the education system, and then you spend 40 additional hours a week watching TV, which is the actual measurement. The average kid in America spends 40 hours a week watching television. You spend 40 hours a week watching TV and 40 hours a week in the education system, and it's a wonder that anybody doesn't come out a leftist. And so it's our task to tear those two things down, which of course costs money, and that's why we're so pleased that we have so many wonderful donors, and we'll talk more about those donors as the weekend goes on, and we couldn't be more grateful for your continued support for the fight. And once we do all that, once we've created a new American groundswell, then we can talk about really fixing the government in a legit and lasting way. Because instead of rushing issue to issue, instead of rushing election to election, instead of letting the urgent trump the necessary, we have to focus on the necessary. It took the left 4 generations to destroy this country. It will take us more than 2 years to fix it. This is a long-term goal, and it requires people who are willing to speak plainly like David Horowitz, and it requires people who are willing to speak hilariously like Andrew Klavan, and people who are willing to speak fluently like Bill Whittle. It requires people who are willing to just bash the left in the head like Ann Coulter. It requires people to speak truth. It requires you to tell your friends the truth, to not be cowed by the fact that they think you're a bad person, because, hey, that's really what they think. They don't think you're wrong, they think you're nasty and evil. And your first task is to convince them that they are the ones who are actually nasty and evil, because that is the truth. The bottom line here is that the only way to defeat the folks on the left is to base ourselves in the reality. And the reality is that the left always fails. It will only be a question of whether this is a long-term process or a short-term process. And it means we have to live in the world of reality, which is to find people as they are, not as we would wish them to be. It means delivering content to them that they understand and identify with. We're not going to get college kids to read Edmund Burke or Russell Kirk. It ain't going to happen. It means finding ways to communicate with people who, in the past, we've scorned because we think they're unsophisticated. You know what they are, and they vote. It's about finding ways to convince them that this is not just a battle about ideas, but it's a battle about values and principles. And that if they're on the wrong side of that battle, they're not only on the wrong side of history, as President Obama likes to say, as though there were a side to history, but that they are on the wrong side of morality. They're the wrong side of ethics, the wrong side of values. And George Washington said, "Truth will ultimately prevail where there is pains taken to bring it to light." We must take those pains. We must